Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome you to the opening session of the 2012 NCAA Convention. I'm Ed Ray, President of Oregon State University and Chair of the NCAA Executive Committee. I have the pleasure of moderating this opening session and welcoming you to Indianapolis, Indiana. With me on the dais this afternoon are the respective chairs of the Division II and III presidential governing bodies. I'm pleased to welcome Drew Bogner, Malloy College, Chair of the Division II President's Council, and Jim Boltman, Hope College, Chair of the Division III President's Council. Unfortunately, Judy Genshaft, Chair of the Division I Board of Directors from the University of South Florida, was unable to join us this afternoon. New chairs will guide Divisions II and III in 2012, and I'd like to commend the Presidents Bogner and Boltman for their exemplary leadership. Each of you have made significant contributions to the association, and we look forward to your continued leadership and association activities in the future. I know how much time and energy goes into leading a divisional board or council, and I'd like to ask each of you here to please join me in thanking Presidents Bogner and Boltman for their outstanding service to the association. It's customary at this point in the opening business session for the chair to present the report of the NCAA Executive Committee. As many of you know, the NCAA federated governance structure allows each division autonomy to address its varied issues. However, it is important for us to keep in mind that we gather annually at this convention as one association. The NCAA Executive Committee is composed of 16 presidents and chancellors from the three divisions: the president of the NCAA, 3 non-voting members, the chair of the Division I Leadership Council, and the chairs of the management councils in Divisions II and III. The Executive Committee's duties and responsibilities include approval of the association's budget, oversight of association-wide issues, initiation and settlement of litigation, and employment of the NCAA president. With that in mind, I'd like to report briefly on what has been a busy and productive year for the association. Over the past year, the NCAA Executive Committee has incorporated several policy and procedural changes to enhance communications, expand our focus on inclusion, and increase overall governance effectiveness and efficiency. As a higher education association with a primary goal of enhancing the educational experience of our student athletes, we are constantly seeking to ensure that the voice of the student athlete resonates throughout the structure and decision-making processes. The Student Athlete Advisory Committees in all 3 divisions have done tremendous work over the past year and in previous years by identifying issues, providing feedback and comments, and engaging the larger population of student athletes nationwide. This year, the Executive Committee added as a standing agenda item a report from each of the divisional student athlete advisory committees. This has been a tremendous opportunity for those groups to engage the presidents who serve on the Executive Committee and for the committee to hear directly from the leadership of our student athletes. In terms of inclusion, the Executive Committee in 2010 approved a new framework for diversity and inclusion that, while keeping the necessary emphasis on race and gender, incorporates a broader approach that includes other dimensions of diversity, such as LGBT issues and physical disability. In support of this framework, the committee endorsed a series of recommendations to realign the governance structure and enhance the association-wide Minority Opportunities and Interest Committee and the Committee on Women's Athletics by expanding their rosters to include presidential involvement from all 3 divisions. Additionally, the committee endorsed a recommendation for equal distribution of members among Divisions 1, 2, and 3, and the formal creation of subgroups to address those issues not captured within the current structure. The committee also approved a recommendation from the Committee on Women's Athletics and the Committee on Competitive Safeguards and Medical Aspects of Sports to adopt a policy for transgender student-athlete participation. This policy will assist the membership with questions about fair and equitable participation of student-athletes who identify as transgender. The Executive Committee also concluded a review on membership growth from an association-wide perspective with a recommendation for the development of a robust educational initiative to more adequately inform institutions seeking membership within the NCAA or current members seeking to reclassify their programs. Finally, the committee implemented a series of changes to its meeting format to ensure greater coordination of association-wide issues and to provide greater opportunity to ensure that issues are appropriately vetted by the divisional presidential bodies prior to being taken up by the Executive Committee. These changes include a restructuring of the meeting frequency for the Executive Committee from 4 meetings a year to 2 annually, during the January convention and during the summer months. Prior to each cycle of presidential governance meetings, there is a breakfast session in which all 3 presidential groups collectively meet to review association-wide issues. Also, there is a change in schedule, with the Executive Committee meeting prior to the presidential governance bodies and focusing on new issues to be discussed and forwarded to the divisional bodies the following day. We believe that this new schedule will provide greater opportunity for discussion and consultation of the divisional presidential groups on association-wide matters prior to action by the Executive Committee. Next, as is a tradition within the opening business session, we honor athletic staff members and student athletes who passed away during this past year with a memorial resolutions report. At this time, I would like to ask you to look at pages 64 to 69 of your convention program to see the names of those institutional staff members associated with athletics and student athletes who passed away in 2011. And if I can, I'd like to ask the delegates, guests, and media representatives here to please stand and join me in observing a moment of silence for those men and women who have passed away since we last gathered. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Finally, we have a newer tradition as part of our annual gathering. The NCAA is a member association that is fueled by the work of our colleges, universities, and conferences, and the hundreds of thousands of administrators who proudly make the athletics and academics experiences of our student athletes meaningful. Their efforts are tireless, and their commitment often goes unheralded. So at this time, I would like to acknowledge and express appreciation for those in our audience who plan to retire during the 2011-12 academic year. And if I can, I'd like to ask those of you who are planning to retire to please stand so that the rest of us can acknowledge your service. Come on. There are not a lot of public outings here this afternoon, I see. Thank you. It is now time to hear from the NCAA President, Mark Emmert. Many of you may have known Mark from his previous stops at Montana State University, the University of Connecticut, Louisiana State University, or the University of Washington, or you may have had a chance to meet him over the past year or so during his leadership here at the NCAA. I can say from a personal standpoint, I don't know a warmer, better person, anyone of greater integrity and a more perfect leader for the NCAA during these very, very challenging times. I'm now pleased to introduce him to address the association. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mark Emmert.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ed. I'm glad Ed didn't ask those of you that would like to retire this year. It would have been a bigger crowd. Well, first of all, let me join President Ray and welcome all of you to this year's convention in Indianapolis. Ironically, we had my first convention last year in San Antonio where it was colder and snowier, if you remember that. It's actually warmer here in Indianapolis. And we have, as you see when you look around the room here, a wonderful crowd. We've got terrific attendance that I hope is a reflection of all of the deep conviction that people have about intercollegiate athletics, and also as a reflection of the serious issues that we have in front of us as an organization. This has been, by any measure, an extraordinary year. It's been a year in which intercollegiate athletics has probably, if there's any of you in the room that are communications or journalism faculty members or students, if you did a content analysis of all the media results for 2011, I suspect we would have set a record for the amount of copy that was written and stories that were filed and electronic media that was produced around what was going on in intercollegiate athletics this past year. It was a year which I think in very fundamental ways shaped a lot of people's opinions, whether it was reinforcing or disproving their views about intercollegiate athletics in pretty profound ways. And the stories that have been told and the storylines that have evolved over this past year have been pretty loud and pretty clear. The storylines about university presidents and administrators have made cases like they only care about money, with conference realignment as Exhibit A. That administrators only see athletes as fundraising tools, as something to promote the university. I've seen storylines that say leaders of universities and leaders of this association are powerless and unwilling to make change. That we refuse to hold student athletes or coaches to standards of the academy and of higher education. Similarly, how many stories have we seen or heard this past year that talk about coaches in lines sort of like this? Everybody cheats. All they care about is winning. They have no loyalty to their institution or to their students. They're all millionaires. And then I think the worst and most disturbing storylines have been about our student athletes themselves. In fact, I've heard the word student athlete described as an oxymoron, used with absolute derision. The storyline goes that they're not even capable of getting educations. They aren't prepared to come to our colleges and our universities. They aren't interested in getting an education, and in fact, they don't get an education. The summary of all of those storylines that we've seen this year is essentially that there's no ethics and there's no integrity in collegiate sport, and that the whole system is broken. That's what we've seen played out again and again and again. But here's some really bad news. There's some truth in those criticisms. We can't hide from all of the facts that some of those criticisms, some of those critiques are in fact valid. And we need to be honest about what the real facts are and not trying to hide from them. And if we don't deal with those, then we'll allow those storylines to define us and who we are and what we're about. We don't want another 2011. We don't want another year like that. What part of those storylines is true? What part of it rings true to me and I suspect to many of you? Well, sometimes we have seen behaviors that don't match our values. We have seen coaches that cheat. We have seen some people who want to win at all costs. We do have some small number of student athletes who aren't interested in education. And we have others that candidly don't get the education that they deserve. Some administrators are fixated on revenues, and some student athletes really are taken advantage of, and we can't ignore some of those storylines that are true. The storylines are about only a handful of high-profile programs. They include a lot of hyperbole. But the worst thing about it is, to me, the very worst thing about those storylines is that they completely overshadow all of the wonderful and good things that are going on in intercollegiate athletics. So 2011 was also the year that saw the highest graduation rates ever in Division I. We all know that, and we celebrated it, but yet that was a story that wasn't much regaled. We know from the data from Divisions II and new studies in Division III that the same held in those divisions as in one, that our student athletes are graduating at higher rates than the rest of the student bodies across all 400,000 of our student athletes in all three divisions. We saw that. We saw some of the greatest athletic competitions that we've ever seen. We had the highest levels of participation, and never before has America been more interested in our competitions than they were in this last year. But the storylines overwhelmed all of that, and we didn't get a chance to tell all those great storylines. In part, of course, we also have to be honest that there's nothing new about those storylines. In many ways, it's those storylines and those problems that were at the heart of the creation of the NCAA over 105 years ago, 110 years ago nearly now. In part, those problems are why we're all in this room. And we need to recognize that. You know, I often tell the story of the very first power coach who overruled his president, ran around his president to the alumni to gain advantage that I know of. And that very first coach that did that was William Reed at Harvard University in 1904. When Coach Reed, then a 20-something football coach, realized that probably the most powerful president of a university in American history, Charles Eliot, was bound and determined to destroy football, he did the only sensible thing for a football coach. He ran to his alumni. In fact, he ran to his most famous alumnus, the President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt. And by going to his most famous alumnus, he was able to fend off a president who wanted to end football at Harvard, and in fact, he wanted to end it in the United States because of all the things that were wrong, because of all the over-commercialization that was going on, because of all the injuries and indeed deaths that were going on to young men who were playing this relatively new game of football, and how orthogonal or completely opposed to the values of higher education he saw college sport. And so Coach Reed goes to Teddy Roosevelt, and they decide to form this association not to destroy sports, but to mend sports rather than ending sports, to make sure that they address those problems and those issues so that we could create this wonderful American tradition called intercollegiate athletics. And the tensions that existed then between the collegiate and the commercial models still exist today. Those tensions have never gone away. What happens now, though, as we deal with the battles over control of college sports, who's really in charge, the perennial issues that we all face that aren't new, what's new today is the 21st century context, that those same issues now play out in a very, very different world than they played out 100 years ago when we started this great endeavor. Today, we've got an explosion in media revenue that we enjoy and provides enormous opportunities for our student athletes, but changes context quite a bit. Today, we've got a 24/7 news coverage that brings everything into much starker relief and does so instantaneously, and does so on countless distribution channels, whether they're electronic or print. Today, we have social media and other ways of reporting information and behavior that didn't exist 100 years ago, not even 20 years ago, or in some cases 10 years ago. I don't know about you, but I am awfully glad that there weren't camera phones and video phones and Twitter around when I was 19 years of age to record everything I did when I was 19 years of age. Much of that experience I just as soon forget. The other thing that's changed consequentially, even in the past 40 or 50 years, has been the evolution of what we can kind of loosely call the big dream syndrome in professional sport that's impacted us pretty dramatically. 50 years ago or so, it wasn't necessarily everyone who wanted to play basketball's dream to play in the NBA. Their dream was to play in college ball, to go to college and play at that level and get an education there. And they didn't think college is only a tool for me to get to the NBA. They didn't think if only I can get to the right team to play football, I can then get into the NFL team of my dreams. We now have far too many of our young people who are starting on travel teams and running around the country from the time they're 6 years of age on. They're learning that they need to do this and they need to do that so that someday they can play at a professional level. Someday their lottery ticket will come in because they have this big dream of becoming a professional athlete. I love professional athletics. I support everything that goes on there in professional sport world. That's a great thing. But you know, last year we got survey data from all of our student athletes, and fully 50%, half of our Division II basketball players, men's basketball players, half of them reported that they intended to have a career in professional basketball. Half of Division II men's basketball players believed they were going to have a career in professional basketball. That's different than it was 50 years ago. That's changed a lot of the context within which we have to address all of the problems that we know all too well. We've also heard this year plenty of solutions. They've been bantered about all over the place. We can kind of run down a laundry list of them. We can solve all these problems if only we had a BCF playoff. We could solve all of these problems if we simply paid our student athletes a salary. We'd solve everything if we declared freshmen ineligible. If only we just professionalized football and men's basketball. If we capped coaches' salaries. If we cut athletic budgets in half. I've even heard some people say, all we have to really do is just blow up the NCAA and everything would be fine. I'm not enamored of that solution, by the way. But I've heard it suggested many, many times. Now, the other fact is that not everything in those proposals is wrong. Some of them have some interesting and good ideas in the midst of them. They're just too simple and too narrow. H.L. Mencken, one of my favorite journalists, once famously said, for every problem, there is one solution, which is simple and neat and wrong. And I think that's exactly what we have here today. There's no magic solutions. There's no silver bullets. I love the easy button ad, you know, for whatever company that is. There's no easy button to press that sort of solves all these problems for us. We have to, in fact, deal with these realities. And while the solutions themselves aren't exactly clear and they're complex, I would contend that we really are at a point in the history of intercollegiate athletics where we have, in essence, a fork in the road. We've got two clear options that are being staked out in front of us. Again, widely publicized and widely discussed. The first one is to simply give up on the collegiate model. If students can't be educated, if you can't compete and be a good student, if it doesn't matter whether you care about all the other sports other than those that generate revenue, then you just professionalize the whole opportunity and turn it into professional sport. We've heard that pronounced again and again and again as the solution to the problems of intercollegiate athletics. It is essentially to end it. Hire professional teams, put your university or college's name on the front of their jersey and their personal name on the back, and call it a day. That's basically one branch of the road in front of us. The other branch is to say, look, we've got to fix the collegiate model. We have to acknowledge there are real problems that need to be dealt with, and we have to deal with them in the real context of the 21st century, but we have to embrace the basic values of the collegiate model. And obviously, you won't be surprised to hear I have a preference between these two branches. In the first place, I don't think for us there's any real choice in all of this. We simply have to look at a model of a professional model that emphasizes one set of values, and that model says look, we care about entertainment value, we care about revenue generation, and that's it. Or we embrace the collegiate model that says we value something entirely different. Yes, we like the fact that we have some sports that are highly entertaining. Yes, we like the fact that it generates revenue that allows us to do all the other things that we do, but that's not what we live for. What we live for is the education of our athletes, that education and athletics goes hand in hand, that we want all of our student athletes to be valued in all of our sports. While people don't watch rowing or volleyball or fencing as much as they watch football or men's basketball, that doesn't mean we don't value them as part of our enterprise. We do. We value things like Title IX, and don't think that it's just some interesting little annoyance that we have to manage over here. We care about increasing participation opportunities for all of our student athletes so that they can fulfill their dream of trying to excel in their sport. We value deeply the tie between athletics and the classroom and believe that athletics and academics can lead to the best educational experience that a young man or young woman can possibly have. There's no doubt that finding the balance between all of those conflicting issues today is a lot harder than it used to be. But it's also true that it's never been more important. That's what I heard last August from all of the Division I presidents when we got together for a retreat. That's what I hear every time I sit down with the Division II and Division III presidents. That those are their values, that's what they care about, that's what they want to maximize. The reforms in Division I that were launched last August exemplify what I think are two very simple, complicated, but simple propositions. One, that student athletes have to be students in all the ways that we mean that. And two, that we have to behave with integrity consistent with our own values and our own rule structure. Now, in Division I, there's efforts underway to make serious, even dramatic change in all of those directions. That's what those reform efforts are about in Division I. Making sure that we have academic expectations that don't just encourage, but mandate that young men and women are academically prepared when they come into our colleges and universities. And that we hold them to the right standards for academic performance as well as athletic performance if they're going to advance into our championships or if their programs are going to be part of the NCAA. Secondly, this whole group has been talking about and advancing another simple notion, and that is that we have to worry about student athletes' well-being. The model of scholarship support, for example, is now over 40 years old, but 40 years ago, student athletes weren't putting in 40 to 50 hours a week working on their sport and competing at the highest levels. The demands and the context of the 21st century is very different than the one that existed not very long ago. And the opportunities and the challenges that our student athletes face are very different than they were 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. And the way we handle their well-being has to reflect that. We've launched an effort in Division I, as you're well aware, to reform our rule book. Our rule book has emerged over that same time frame, and it's created a variety of rules that are unenforceable or irrelevant or completely out of context or just anachronistic compared to where the world is today in the 21st century, and we have to fix that. And similarly, the flurry of activity around rules enforcement has created new strains and pressures on the enforcement model in Division I that the old context simply can't keep up with and doesn't fit where we need it to be today. And we're making great progress in all of that. Great progress. And we see similar efforts underway in a variety of positions that have been taken in Divisions II and Divisions III as well to reinforce those core values of what it means to be involved in intercollegiate athletics from the collegiate model perspective. But we have to do a few things more. Even when we get those pieces done, we've got more work to do, and we need to especially be willing to focus some attention on the very simple notion of responsibility. There is today, I think, a good bit of confusion about who is responsible for collegiate athletics. There's confusion about who is actually in charge. we need to clarify who is in charge, what different groups' roles are, and what they aren't. Presidents and boards of universities and colleges need to be fully in charge of and responsible for their athletic programs. Conferences have to be responsible to do more than just maximize revenue. I'm all in favor of maximizing revenue. It's a good thing. But it's about more than just that. Coaches, administrators, anyone around an athletic program has to be held to the same kind of behavioral standards as everybody else inside a university. That's not too high a price to pay to get to participate in intercollegiate athletics. You are part of a university environment. Your standards of behavior and conduct have to be the same as they would be for anyone else inside that university or college. Student athletes have to take responsibility for a very simple thing, and that is you have an obligation to take advantage of the opportunities that have been put in front of you, educationally, athletically, and in every other way that a university or college offers them to you, and you have to follow the rules. That's not too much to ask, in my opinion. Alumni, boosters, people who love these games that we all play, they've got to understand that being a fan doesn't mean you're in charge. Doesn't mean you're in charge. And we in the NCAA, we have to take responsibility in every way that we can to serve our student athletes consistent with all of those values and assist all of you, the colleges and university member institutions and our conferences, to deal with this very complex context in new and the most helpful ways that we possibly can. And we too have to adjust everything we do to fit this new context and provide support and leadership. At the end of the day, you know, the collegiate model provides us with those two basic notions, in my opinion. The notion that you are a student who happens to be an athlete, and we're going to act with integrity consistent with our rules. Those are the two things we have to keep in front of us. And so here we are at this curious fork in the road, and we have to decide, are we going to take the collegiate model, maximize our values, make the changes that we have to make, even ones that are hard to make, but bring the collegiate model up to date in the 21st century, consistent with our values as academic enterprises, or are we going to wave the white flag, throw in the towel and say, look, it's too much, let's just pretend that this is all about playing the games. It's all about driving the most attention we can to football and men's basketball. Take the money and run. I know where all of you stand on that issue. You know where I stand on this issue. What we have to do is work together to make sure that we act on those values, that we let the world know which fork we have chosen in that road, and that by the time we get together next year, we've got a very different storyline than the one that we had this year. I know we can do that. I know that you all want to do it. I sit in your meetings. I watch you. I see the commitment that you have for our student athletes. And I know how important it is to you as individuals and to your programs. With your help and your commitment and dedication, we can make that change. We can make that change in 2012. We can make it so that when we get to back together again next year, we've got some really wonderful stories to tell about making the difference for our student athletes. Thank you very much for everything you do for our student athletes. It's greatly appreciated. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you. Now I get to change gears. Since 2004, the NCAA has had the president has had the pleasure of awarding the NCAA's Gerald R. Ford Award to an individual who has provided extraordinary leadership as an advocate for intercollegiate athletics on a continuous basis over the course of an entire career. It is our Career Achievement Award, if you will. This year's awardee is certainly no different. Our honoree is an individual who has demonstrated a commitment to excellence in both the championship teams that she's created and the young women that she's developed who've played with her. In every aspect of her life, she has been an exemplary educator.
It was 1974, And Patricia Head was just 22 years old and fresh off her college playing career when she was named the head coach of the University of Tennessee's women's basketball team. She was, in her own words, overwhelmed and scared to death. The young coach was even too shy to tell her new employers, who called her Pat, that she'd been called Trish her entire life. That first team finished with a more than respectable record of 16-8, and she has never had a losing season. After her second year as coach, she got back on the court as a player and earned a spot on the 1976 U.S. Olympic team. Well, she did more than earn a spot. She was the co-captain of the team that won the silver medal in Montreal. 8 years later, she would coach the 1984 U.S. Olympic team to a gold medal at the Los Angeles Olympics. Pat Summitt's 38 seasons at Tennessee have produced an unparalleled record that has reached historic proportions. Her Lady Vols have won more than 84% of their games, won or shared 31 SEC championships, made 18 Final Four appearances, a men's and women's record, and won 8 national championships. Along the way, Pat became the winningest basketball coach, men's or women's, in NCAA history. Since 1976, every one of her student athletes has had the thrill of playing in at least one Final Four. Her former players read like a who's who of basketball and include WNBA All-Stars and Olympians Michelle Marciniak, Shamiqua Holtzclaw, Tamika Catchings, Candace Parker, Kara Lawson, and the list goes on. The courts at 3 different schools in her home state are named in Pat's honor. Her high school, Cheatham County High, her college alma mater, UT Martin, and of course the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Pat was the first female coach to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and this year she was again on the SI cover, this time as the Sportswoman of the Year. The honors and awards fill page after page of the record books, but could there be any greater legacy than the fact that every UT women's basketball player who has completed her NCAA eligibility has earned her college degree? As a coach and an educator, she instills a pattern of success and constantly challenges her players to reach their highest potential as both students and athletes. Off the court, Pat has been an equally successful leader, donating $600,000 to the UT Knoxville and UT Martin campuses to support the women's basketball program at each school, being a member of Big Brothers Big Sisters, and co-chairing or being the spokesperson for the United Way campaign, the Tennessee Easter Seal Society, the American Heart Association, Race for the Cure, and juvenile diabetes. With her medical diagnosis this summer, the We Back Pat campaign went viral overnight, and Pat has asked that all proceeds go to Alzheimer's Tennessee and the University of Tennessee Medical Center. She did not invent the game of basketball, but what she did was take the game to a new level. Through her unwavering commitment to excellence, her dedication, and her strong leadership over many years, Pat Head Summitt changed the way the entire world looked at women and sport. It is with great respect that the NCAA presents the 2012 Gerald R. Ford Award to Patricia Head Summitt.
Unfortunately for all of us, Pat's not able to be with us this afternoon, but I would like you to please join me in welcoming the University of Tennessee's Director of Women's Athletics, Joan Cronin. Joan, please come out. Wherever you are. You are.
Great speech.
Thank you. Thank you. All yours.
Thank you, Mark. Wasn't that a wonderful video? Awesome. But as I watched it, I did think, times change, change happens. Did you notice the hairdos and the styles of uniforms? things do change. It is my honor to accept this award on behalf of a very special person and a very special coach. I've worked with Pat for 29 years, and I've always known her as a woman of integrity, a woman who is a great educator, a woman who is a competitor, a woman who is the best ambassador that women's basketball in the University of Tennessee has ever had, and of course, the woman with the stare. Now, as Pat battles this disease of Alzheimer's, what I know is she is a woman of courage. She is battling this disease just like she prepares for a game. In fact, today, the reason she can't be here is that she is preparing our team to battle the University of Kentucky tonight. I am very honored, and Pat is honored, to get this award. Let's see what Pat has to say.
This is the University of Tennessee Lady Ball coach, Pat Summitt. I'm sorry I can't be with you at the convention to receive the NCAA President Gerald R. Ford Award. As you may know, we are just down the road in Lexington, Kentucky, preparing to play the Wildcats tonight. I would like to thank the NCAA President Mark Emmert for this tremendous honor. I have to tell you, I am truly humbled to receive an award named after a gentleman who was the leader of our country as the 38th president. As we all know, athletic educators, leadership is the backbone of everything we do each and every day. As a head coach, I have a daily responsibility to make sure that our Lady Vol basketball players know that they are students first and athletes second. They are at the University of Tennessee to earn a degree and prepare for life after basketball. That is something I reinforce every day through words and action. I love teaching both the game and the life skills, accompanying it with, I have always said that the gym is my classroom. And along the way, we have been fortunate to win some games too. You must know that I am extremely proud of what we have been able to accomplish over the years. And I am thankful for the leadership at the University of Tennessee, for our presidents and chancellors, to the athletic administration, who have shown and sustained significant support for almost 4 decades. You also helped make all this happen. I appreciate longtime University of Tennessee Women's Athletics Director Joan Cronin accepting this award on my behalf. Thank you for this wonderful honor. Enjoy the convention.
I should have handed you that. So thank you, Pat, electronically. Thank you, Joan. For 4 decades now, in nearly heroic ways, Pat has elevated not just women's basketball, but intercollegiate athletics overall. It's been a remarkable thing to watch this woman embrace her student athletes, embrace this kind of success that she drives. We've all seen her, she is one passionate woman. I've had the chance to be with her several times since her disease struck, and she is handling it with the kind of commitment, compassion, and fierceness exactly that you'd expect. She has been a model in her behaviors for the young people that she's dealt with all of her life, and she really exemplifies this Gerald R. Ford Award. Thank you so much, Joan, for being with us, and please give Pat our best, and good luck tonight.
Thank you.
Yep.
Highlights from this session will be available on ncaa.org immediately following this session. The delegates reception will take place in the J.W. Marriott Grand Ballroom, numbers 6 through 10. I want to thank you all for attending this year's NCAA convention. I wish you a happy and prosperous new year. And this session is adjourned.